In case you're only just tuning in, I'm Geraldine Kendall-Adams, and I'll be the facilitator for the Born in the 21st Century session. I'm really looking forward to this one. I'll shortly hand you over to Olivia Wyndham-Stewart, the co-founder of the Museum of British Colonialism. But first, I have a few short housekeeping announcements to make, so bear with me if you've heard these before. First, as attendees, your cameras and microphones aren't switched on, but you can use the chat function on your menu bar to introduce yourselves and join in the conversation. Please do keep sharing your experiences and links. You're also very welcome to tweet using the hashtag Museums2020. There is live closed captioning available at the bottom of your Zoom screens, as well as audio describing via the interpretation button at the bottom of your screen. Please switch to the French channel for live audio description. If you have a question that you'd like to put to the panel, then please share this via the Q&A function, which is also in the menu bar. Please include your name and organisation if relevant. The chair will put selected questions you've asked to the panel, so please keep these short and to the point to help her out. You can leave and rejoin the webinar at any time. We are recording this session and it will be available on our website in due course. And finally, please bear with us if there are any technical problems during the webinar. Feel free to send me a private chat message if you have any troubles, and I'll do my best to help. Right, now it's time to hand you over to Olivia to get started.
Hello, I'm Olivia Wyndham-Stewart. Thank you very much, Geraldine, for all your support. And hello to everyone who we can't see. Rachel has just joined us, and Kinsey, if you're able to put on your camera, it'd be great if you could join us too on the video. Okay, here we are. So this is our panel. The first thing to say is that listed to join us, we had Chow Tayana, who is the co-founder of the Museum of British Colonialism. I'm the other co-founder. Unfortunately, Chow has had a death in the family, so is not able to join us today. But please do check out her work because she's phenomenal. She's a Kenyan heritage activist and a very wonderful person. She also is the founder of African Digital Heritage and Open Restitution. So we hope that she's with us in spirit, and I'll be trying to represent sort of for both of us, slightly as chair, slightly as Chow and me. And then also we are joined by Rachel Crossley, who is the museum director of the East End Women's Museum. Since 2018, the East End Women's Museum started first in 2015, so Rachel joined them a little way into their journey as director. Previous to that, she was working at Arts Council England and Historic Royal Palaces, as well as the Museum of London and the V&A. So she is very, very experienced and comes to the panel with a whole wealth of knowledge. And she's passionate about women's history, community engagement, and gender equality. So we're excited to hear from Rachel. And then we are also joined with Kinsey from Kinsey Abdullah, who is a visual artist, curator, and educator, and also the co-director of Numbi Arts, which is a cross-arts organisation based at the Rich Mix in East London in Bethnal Green. And she is also the founder of the Somali Museum UK, which is a new organisation in the mix that we're looking forward to hearing about. So thank you very much for joining us. We're going to kick off the conversation quite quickly and just dive straight in. So I'd just like to invite Rachel at the beginning to just tell us a little bit in the whole huge landscape of museums in the UK, what inspired your team to start the East End Women's Museum, and yeah, tell us about that journey.
Of course, yeah. Why do we need more museums? We've got 3,000 already. I think we need many more. And as you've said, I wasn't a co-founder, unlike the two other amazing panelists. So I have, I guess, a slightly different perspective, but I can suggest why I think it was founded. And there's kind of two ways to answer that. So there's a kind of practically why it happened, which is a story that many of you might know. If you know us at all, people tend to know our inception story, which is that someone said he was going to set up the East End Women's Museum on Cable Street in London, and it was revealed to be a Jack the Ripper museum. So there's probably a whole other panel discussion about whether the Jack the Ripper museum is a museum or not, but I'm not going to indulge them any further or talk about them. So as a result of that, there was a kind of positive protest, and one of those, among several things that happened, actually, one of those things was to set up the East End Women's Museum as we see it today. I think perhaps the more kind of the heart of this discussion, that more kind of existential theoretical question, why set up a museum, and especially a women's museum? Well, it's quite astounding in a way. There's quite a big group of women's museums internationally, but we're the only currently kind of dedicated one in England. We've obviously got Glasgow Women's Library, who are our soul sisters in Scotland, but there's not another one in England. So we're not well represented internationally in women's museums. And I think our time demands it. It's, you know, it demands change. I think the public expectations are catching up with museums, and one of those ways is the conversation around who gets represented within our museums. And I was thinking about this, that there would be a few different ways to try and do our work, and there's kind of different routes we could have gone down. So you've got kind of established museums who have done great projects in this space. For example, Tyne and Weir Archives and Museums, who did a big project in 2018, recognising that their archive and collection was quite male dominated, that introduced more women's stories and kind of objects pertaining to women's lives into their collections, so that future stories, future exhibitions can be more gender balanced. You've also got kind of more like grassroots projects that don't exist within a museum framework. So I'm thinking of like organisations like the Young Historians Project, who do work around promoting and building capacity for young Black emerging historians, and do some of the work a museum might do. But I guess we exist somewhere in the middle, and I think in a really interesting way. Like I've always thought, everything in my career, I've thought about this idea of being subtly subversive. And I think that's what a new museum can do, because we exist within a kind of structure, and we have a kind of a framework and tools at our disposal as museum professionals to kind of shift dialogues and do things differently, while being a new museum that doesn't have necessarily kind of a kind of pathway that it has to continue to tread. So yeah, I think, as I say, there's a kind of practical reason why we set up, and that was this galvanizing protesting force, but there's also this sort of existential question that is at the heart of what we do around better representation of diverse and women's stories. Thanks.
Sorry, I was on mute. I think that resonates so much with how many of us who have started these initiatives feel about what we're doing. Kinsey, you're just at the beginning, at the seed of an idea for a new museum, which is just taking shape. So I would love to hear more about what inspired you to take that step to just go for it, and what you envisage for the Somali Museum UK when it gets up and running.
Yeah, thank you so much for this opportunity. We're very fond of the Women's East End Museum. It is kind of like hard act to follow, but we really, it's an honor to learn a lot from the landscape. The museum, the Somali Museum UK was born out of similar struggles. We wanted to address issues around social justice and center the Somali British narrative. And Numbi Arts, which is actually where this is comes from, is an organization, is arts organization. We've been doing cross arts work, probably one of the oldest Somali arts organizations. Been going for over 30 years in different shapes, and it's kind of a collective of artists from different backgrounds across different art forms, and what really propelled in a similar way for a long time, we have been looking at kind of absence in archives and museum collections that address or don't address the Somali British history. And it really also, one of the kind of propellers, what propelled us forward, apart from an urgent need from the Somali community, and a need that is very well articulated from a lot of the people that we engage through our work, mainly working on archiving. And actually one of the spaces was the Jack the Ripper Museum, because we've been looking at kind of like spaces occupied by Somali community, by Somali heritage, Somali history. And the Rio Cafe, which is just off Cable Street in Ansign Street, was one of the landmarks where we did a lot of heritage walks. And actually that Jack the Ripper building was the last surviving Somali cafe that I've actually witnessed myself. And then shortly after that, we got funding from Tower Hamlets Council through the Somali Task Force to start a project, a community heritage project in partnership with Tower Hamlets local library and heritage archive. Amazing. I mean, it really has been an amazing place, and we're very privileged to have that space and that archive in Tower Hamlets, which really has greatly inspired us. And that project, as a kind of idea, was to train 15 young Somali people with, through heritage archiving, heritage walks, all kind of different digital, oral history. And really after that, we ended that project, which we did in partnership with Tower Hamlets Heritage Library, as I said, was actually, that's what born the Somali Museum, and it was articulated and kind of in our feedback, and then that museum is needed. So it really brings everything together. And then shortly after that, we did a crowdfunding, and that really confirmed the need, the level of support that we got from the community. So we're, really encouraged, but we're very, very early stages of trying to build a story.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you very much. I'm very excited because Rachel and I have been operating in a space of emerging museums for a few years now. So when there's a new one, it's very exciting because we get to have new friends and new people who sort of understand the struggles and what we do. It's also funny to reflect that even though the Museum of British Colonialism, which started in 2018, is based in the UK and Kenya, and just generally in a sort of networked way all around the world, we're also an East London museum because I'm here in East London and this is where we do work. So we shared sort of East London new museum emerging experience. But so much of what you all said resonated with me. I think that the response to the lack of something, in this hugely crowded landscape where there are so many military museums and war museums and national museums, all of us felt collectively as though something was unrepresented, that there was something missing in that landscape that we couldn't find anywhere. And I know that experience was also felt very keenly by Chow, because the history that we started working on at the beginning, which is the history of the Mau Mau emergency in Kenya, is completely absent in public consciousness, in visual memory, even interestingly, Kinsey, in the archives, because for British colonialism, a huge connection in this space is that the archives were removed from newly independent colonies by the British colonial administration. So there are huge gaps in knowledge in newly independent countries who were former colonies, and also here because those archives were hidden for so long. So we've really worked with archives to understand what's in there that hasn't been communicated in the general public. And I think also we saw it so much as just a positive protest. We try to be in a space where the history is extremely difficult. We try to make it a kind of joyful collaboration. Where there have been sides in different conflict, we've tried to make it a kind of transitional justice movement almost. We've tried to make it a space where people can come together and really confront something extremely serious, but in a very positive way. And that's what we try to kind of like weave through our teams. So I think that's all stuff that really, really resonated with me. Now, I don't know about you guys, but one of the things that we are often asked about is, where's your building, where's your collection? We have neither. So when people ask, when's the museum going to exist? I tell them it does exist. There are all these different places you can find it, but it's obviously a new way of thinking about museums. So maybe, Rachel, you can tell us a little bit about how the East End Women's Museum thinks about collections and buildings and physical spaces. And then Kinsey, we'd love to think about what your vision is for how the Somali Museum UK will also be thinking about some of those issues that people immediately associate with museums when they hear about the idea.
Yeah, that resonates so much. The typical thing that people say to me when I tell them their job is, "Oh, where is it?" Or they'll say, "Oh, I've not visited yet, but I've been meaning to." I say, "No, you don't worry." They're very sweet. So it's interesting, isn't it, that there's an immediate kind of cultural shorthand that a museum means a museum building. And it's something that we've been thinking about a lot lately, because our sort of very exciting next step for the organisation, having operated as a pop-up for the 5 years we've been around, is that we're moving into a building in Barking Town Centre next year. So that's a real preoccupation of mine at the minute. And one thing that I'm really keen to do is that we disaggregate the idea of a museum as an institution, an organisation, a set of values and cultures and outcomes from a museum as a building, because I don't think those are the same thing. And I'm sure we'll get into it in the discussion, like what a perfect pertinent moment to be discussing that when many museums effectively don't exist as buildings that people can visit. So I guess what we're thinking is how the building, when we're in it, and don't get me wrong, the building affords us incredible opportunities. I think it gives us, rightly or wrongly, probably wrongly, but it gives us a kind of a legitimacy, or again a kind of cultural shorthand for people know where it is, they can come and see it, they can visit it, we've got pictures on the website. But knowing that a visit to the museum building, see I do it myself, a visit to museum building is not the raison d'etre of how we're trying to engage people, and that still working as a pop-up, working around East London, working online is an absolutely valid way to engage with the museum without a hierarchy of status, if you like, which I think the kind of a traditional building-based museum has sometimes struggled to get that non-museum, non-building work up to the same status. In terms of objects, yeah, we don't really have any. We have our founding email, and we have one object, a teddy bear made in the factory set up by Sylvia Pankhurst during World War I to support working women into employment. It's a beautiful teddy. But it is our only object. So
where is the object currently stored? Where is the teddy today?
Very kindly stored at our friends at Tower Hamlets Local History and Archives. So yeah, what does it mean to not have objects? I mean, I think again it's about not having a hierarchy of ways to share stories and content. I think fundamentally we are story driven and people centered, not object centered. And it may be that objects are, in the case of the teddy, and I'm sure in many other things to come, whether that's through loans or acquisitions, I'm sure that objects will play a real part in sharing those stories. But equally, they might not do. We might have an installation, we might have a publication, we might have a musical, like we might have a human library where you chat to someone about their life. You know, it's about the kind of best way to share that story and deliver that content to a public audience, I guess. And that doesn't necessarily have to be through objects.
I like the musical idea. I'm not sure if that would, I'm not sure if that would fit to our theme, but it would definitely fit to yours. I like that a lot. And Kinsey, in terms of your own collection and physical space, how do you envisage that unfolding as you develop as a museum?
Well, we don't, I mean, our museum doesn't center collections at the moment anyway. I think our focus is on relationships. Like I said already, there is objects up and down the country of Somali heritage, collections, blunders, colonial. And I think for us, the emphasis is detoxing, it's abolition, it's how we can reclaim our story. A lot of the objects already exist. There's no interpretation for them, or they're misinterpreted or mislabeled. And I think there's a wealth of stuff that object-wise that we can work with. But really what we're centering is relationships, and like it's coming from being an arts organization. For us, it's how, you know, it's exhibitions, it's publications in a similar way. And we have already collected, and I think the advantage of having Taham's archive as our partner means that there is that kind of heritage archiving possibility. So a lot of the stuff that if we were to collect, you know, I know some stuff that we already have is already stored with Tower Hamlets. So we really have that cushion and that friendship and that support. But for us, the focus is, of course, you know, what we're working towards is a building. Maybe in the next 2 years, we haven't, you know, we as well as being based at the Rich Mix and have been there for the past 10 years and working closely with Tower Hamlets Archive, we've also now got a building for a year in Bethnal Green, like in the heart of the community. It's a lovely space. I mean, so we've actually got our own office, which our crowdfunding enabled us to do. But yeah, actual objects are not really a priority for us at the moment.
Yeah, it's so interesting hearing how the kind of conversation around museums has changed over the last few years. I mean, as MBC, we don't have any objects. We don't ever actually really intend to have any objects other than potentially stuff we create, but that could be easily recreated by others in other spaces. So we don't intend to ever have any proprietary like rights over anything. The work that we display is always really work that we've created and we've created together. And it was very interesting to have the video at the beginning about sort of digital museums, because Chow's a digital specialist. She has been developing work and kind of display items that are accessible online, but that can also be shown offline, so we can have pop-up exhibitions. But one of our principles is that anything we create or exhibit must be exhibitable anywhere. So if we have a pop-up exhibition in London, you have to be able to recreate exactly the same exhibition in Kenya. You would have to be able to show it in Singapore. Somebody would have to sit there and be able to recreate the work. So everything is file-based, digitally made, completely sendable, shareable, accessible, because we don't ever want to be centered, because the story that we're exploring together is one that has too many. It isn't a centered story. It doesn't belong in the UK. It belongs with the people who have been affected by it and who are interested in going on those journeys to understand that history. So we've always really seen the idea of museum as process, a museum as creation rather than collection. And that idea for us has also been our kind of slightly subversive way to challenge the idea of the museum in colonial practice, because, you know, in that framework, because that's our kind of, we're doing the like double play with putting the history back and also thinking about how that history has been told and in which institutions. So it's great that so many people are kind of going on that journey to break down and analyze and deconstruct what museums mean, and just to completely almost kind of blow it up and just say, we can take this for ourselves, we can take this idea for ourselves, we can make it about social justice, we can make it about conversation, we can make it about change, and it doesn't have to be your story, it can be everyone's story and it can be in everyone's place. So it's really, really exciting time, I think, to kind of be a museum working in that way. And then so what do you think the kind of opportunities are with museums working in this way as we move towards sort of social justice aims and missions? Like, what do you think the potential opportunities are with curatorial practice, and also what do you think some of the challenges might be if you're working in a new way and maybe people aren't so comfortable or familiar with the things that you're trying to do? Rachel, why don't we start with you?
Go on, you're picking on me.
We're
again.
going round it, yeah.
No, that's cool.
We're going round the same circle. I'll mix it up.
No, you're fine. Oh, he's both so inspiring. Yeah, I guess it's a different kind of practice, isn't it? Which is absolutely what you're speaking to, both speaking to, kind of bringing in those research, and particularly sort of citizen research, kind of more democratized process, as well as kind of participatory arts approaches. So I think, you know, something that we have in mind is where are the opportunities to bring in artists, socially engaged artists, where are the opportunities to bring in different community members who can, whose story this is to tell. So I think that's hugely exciting. I think there's a couple of things that really appeal to me about that approach. One is that it's like, it always slightly just disturbs me, or that kind of a museum where you go in and there's an object and it's behind glass and there's a text panel, feels very finite. It feels very unchallenged, and I'm not the first one to say this, but it really appeals to work through artistic practice for me, because that's the space that holds more uncertainty. It's more kind of agile, it's more ephemeral, and ultimately I think it gets nearer to what we were trying to do. So yeah, that's kind of one aspect. I guess the other one is like, I've just been trying to think this through, like, do we want people to learn things in this museum, or do we want them to feel them? And I think for me it's towards the latter. And how can we have kind of more evocative, emotional, connected experiences where you might not learn a single fact, but you feel inspired, you feel you grow the tools to kind of share your story or challenge injustice that you see in a different part of the community. Those are the kind of, so nebulous, isn't it? But that's ultimately what I think we're trying to get to, right? The challenge is, gosh, I think we're only at the start of realizing those kind of levels of ambitions. We've done kind of participatory arts and research based projects. So for example, we worked alongside, and you can tell it's all in partnership. We all have a lot of friends who've helped us very much. So we worked in partnership with Hackney Museum and Hackney Archives, and a panel of local women who kind of shared their stories and did research into activism within the borough over the last 100 years, and kind of put that together as an exhibition and events program. And you get all the kind of challenges that we know around kind of co-design and what that means in terms of the time you put into it, the sort of the sort of structures you put around it in terms of decision making. You know, I think one of the main challenges, hopefully there's some kind funders who don't take this the wrong way, but how you kind of describe that process to funders where outputs aren't certain. Do you know, sorry, I'm chatting on, but this is so interesting. We just recently became a charity, and the Charities Commission guidance for being a museum hasn't been updated since 2002, back when I was in school, more or less. And it is so old school. So they were challenging whether we can be a museum with charitable objects on the basis that how do you know that what goes into the museum will be high quality, because you don't have a kind of curator. It's so much about these sort of traditional hierarchies of knowledge, and I think breaking that down within the kind of wider ecosystem that we have to exist in can be a real challenge.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and I want to come back to that because there are a few things in the chat about why be a museum, which is an interesting question that I think we can all kind of reflect on a little bit. And Kinsey, what do you anticipate will be some of the sort of the positive opportunities as you go forward and try and build something new, and what do you anticipate maybe some of the challenges?
For us, it's we have already been working kind of locally, globally, up NIMBY, putting on festivals, events, lots of different programs, doing supplementary schools, engaging the community at different levels. And I think for us, what makes this us being a museum and the opportunities is that we can actually we have NIMBY associate artists and artists, other groups of collectives and artists who are resident at NIMBY and have been for many years, who are based in Cardiff, in Hull, in Glasgow, in Manchester, Leeds, different places. And I think what this opportunity gives us is that, you know, to bring all that kind of resources and criteria and curatorial practice and create something at the museum that can actually tell our collective Somali story. And I think that is the kind of, that's what's one of the amazing things. Of course, it's still, we have to register, we have to, you know, all the different like stuff that we have to do. But also one of the advantages that already we have been getting proposals from young Somali museum, you know, people are coming out of like universities with like heritage, museum, kind of different amazing knowledge, and haven't had the opportunity to obviously to work in these mainstream spaces. So, you know, this is really an advantage for us that we can get some of that research and, you know, exhibitions and publications and all those different kind of opportunities that we've always wanted to do, but we haven't had the capacity. And most recently we got funding from the Arts Council, which we're very pleased about. So we're hoping that also opens another door to kind of like think about sustainability on how we can bring about this museum in a way that kind of benefits and engages our community at a different level, a space that's intersectional, inclusive, that kind of means something because it's coming from the people whose story it is. And some of the stories that proposals that we've, I mean, it's mind-blowing. Like people want to like document their family history, like, you know, like grandmother who kind of met their grandfather in this cafe in Hull, and, you know, all these kind of like amazing stories that could be so well documented through poetry, through song, you know, through different art forms. And we're really excited about that. Of course, what's important is that, of course, there's these kind of like, we're still new and we're still learning, and there's a lot that we can, yes, brace ourselves to, but yeah, before we can do that. But we are really excited about all the different things that we could be doing under this Somali Museum umbrella. And all the
I can't wait to come.
I mean, also, like, honestly, we have had some amazing partnerships with Museum of London, British Library, you know, all these different institutions that, especially like the Museum of London, who've been doing amazing work, and there isn't a lot of Somali or even, you know, East African collections. So I think there is opportunities there as well, where we could, whether it's a new V&A that's going to open in East End, you know, whether, you know, making connections and working partnership, a closer partnership with the Women's History, you know, East End Museum. You know, I think there's all those different things that we can navigate, which we're very excited about.
Yeah, I think partnerships is such an interesting thing when you're starting out. You kind of need quite a few people to come along and like hold your hand at various times and say that we can take you on this bit of the journey and we can take you on that bit of the journey and all those various things. And I think that's one of the really great things about, you know, collaborating in this sector. Somebody's actually asked a question, Kinsey, about how the Somali Museum UK would think about collaborating with the Black British Museum if that were to come to fruition. I don't know if that's a conversation. Yeah, yeah.
I mean, I've actually had my eye on that, and, you know, very excited about, you know, we already have, you know, the BCA, so it's actually having a Black, you know, museum in Britain. It's timely and it is very important.
Yeah, and it's related to another kind of question that I'd like us to touch on, which is that a lot of these museums, having a Black British Museum in the UK, a Somali museum, there's a social justice element to entering the whole race question in these countries, and why certain communities have been represented and why certain communities haven't been represented, and the role that museums play in that. So some people have been asking on the chat, why do you call yourself a museum in the first place? Is that really necessary? Isn't this a different kind of organization? Isn't it a new school? Isn't it just a collective? So I'm interested to know why you thought the museum is the thing, is the way to do this, and whether or not, and in what ways you think you're kind of sticking to the traditional types of museum, and or whether you think you're something completely different and you're kind of trying to blow apart the idea of the museum in the first place. Kinsey, why don't you go first?
Yeah, I mean, for us, I think that the museum idea was articulated. It was a need. Obviously, I think there's the inspiration also comes from in Minnesota, Minneapolis in the US, there is a Somali museum, and a lot of our community, people understand what museums spaces can, and it's a heritage. I think also people kind of struggle with the notion of contemporary arts, and you know, it's kind of like, is it a gallery, you know? So we could have easily said, you know, it is a Somali gallery, but I think the museum also has, because people are very interested in their heritage, and they're not seeing themselves in these museums. And I think it's important that even like one of the kind of papers that we received earlier on, it's like this kind of like looking at the space that's very fascinated by young people, like for example, the Jewish Museum. You know, I think it's important to have something that is explicit, that is named, and of course we're not trying to claim that we know the troubled history of museums and where they come from and why they exist, but you know, if we can subvert that and then turn it, you know, we're artists in the end of the day. And I think it's important that we actually have the opportunity, instead of looking for us in these museums, ourselves and our story, how about we create? And I think that's what happens sometimes when you're written out of the story. You know, at what point do you say, no?
Yeah.
You cannot write
No
out of the story. Because guess what? We're going to write ourselves in and on our own terms. And I think it's important that there is a women's museum, there is a Somali museum, there is a Black museum, that, you know, we can't be kind of, you know, there's a Somali saying that says, if you're not, you know, you mention yourself, you center yourself. So I think it's important that we center ourselves, and, you know, and our story, it is a British story, and it can't be every time we're written about, we've been written about in this negative manner, and it really doesn't help. The way the stigma, the way that we are continuously, everybody's writing about us apart from ourselves. And I think this is something that we can't not tolerate. I think it's important that, although, you know, we work with schools, you know, we want to be in the curriculum, you know, we want to be part of the story, because we're here and we're not going anywhere. So, you know, if you're not going to do it for us, we'll do it ourselves.
Yeah, quite right. Yeah, excellent. I'm feeling all fired up about this now. And Rachel, how do you feel about the kind of debate over, well, should you be a museum or should you be an East End Women's Cultural and Heritage Education Institute?
When that option is,
like, yeah, I know, when that option is so appealing.
Partly because it's sort of pithy. Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with Kinsey. I think it's really important, and I think we as emerging museums, but we as a museum sector and wider society are engaged in a dialogue about what a museum is, most notably through the icon discussion that's going on, but in conversations like this, through the kind of wider societal debates about who gets represented within our kind of public realm and museum spaces. And that feels that is contested, and that can be challenged and shifted. And I think it's important to be part of that. I actually think it's also more interesting, and it speaks to me personally. You know, I've worked for many years in museums. It's what I love, and I think, and we you know, this is called doing things differently, and we do, but we do also use like we're not kind of in a silo, right? We're drawing on all the kind of practices that have developed within museums and more broadly, I guess, kind of artistic and community practice. And I think we sit very readily within that. And I think museums should mean a real spectrum of things, and it has to be inclusive of projects like ours if it's going to be a good progressive thing, I would argue.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, for us, the idea of the museum was it was kind of a dual thing. It provides a space for us to do work, like create things, have exhibitions, put work out into the world that didn't exist, and kind of engage with it in the traditional museum way of having an exhibition. But also it allowed us to just center that idea of a museum and what a museum is, especially as it relates to colonialism, because museums are spaces of power, right? They're political spaces. You think, you know, as it said by Alice Proctor and, you know, various people in this space, museums are not neutral, okay? And they are spaces where cultural and intellectual and political battles happen. And the absence of museums talking about certain things is a serious issue. So if you introduce, I want to know what this Somali expression is about. If nobody's talking about it, you go in there and talk about it. You know, we said, we don't know this history. We don't understand this history. No one has told us. We want to learn about it. Nobody gave the people forming other museums the necessary authority to form them.
Right.
They just stole a whole bunch of objects and said, I have a museum. Well, I didn't steal anything, so I can say I have a museum too. So it's about kind of like reclaiming the power about like what makes an institution official, and what means that you can kind of get involved in that political discourse or that realm of power to kind of have that conversation. So, you know, we wanted to kind of play with that idea about what a museum is and like who gets to tell the stories, who gets to put things out into the world. And there are things about museum practice that's appropriate to us, but there are things we also completely want to break down, like access and what kind of things you have, and especially this idea of intangible heritage, because a lot of our work is about oral history, because in Africa and many former colonies, the way of communicating across generations and making sure that things are known is through people's stories. We have the ability now to share those, so you can go onto our website and hear stories from Mau fighters who fought in the War of Independence against the British, because we've recorded them. And we think that's an important thing, and we think that is worthy of being a museum, even though it's not an object. So we like existing in the museum space. Nobody's told us yet that we can't, so we've chosen to. And that's just, yeah, that's how we feel about it. It's kind of a space of discussion and inspiration and challenge and all those various different things. So we might need to kind of think about looking forward, you know, to what you guys see next for your museums in the next few years and where you see things going. And Rachel, we'd love to hear more about what's going to be happening with your space.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so, well, we'll be all being well. Obviously, it's quite a challenging and uncertain time to be working on a building project, but all being well, we'll be opening next year. So essentially at the minute, the team in the museum are working on sort of business planning, fundraising, and particularly kind of program development. And basically, what does it mean to kind of open a museum building in the most inclusive, interesting, representative way. So thinking about kind of co-design programming, lots of audience consultation, and sort of testing, piloting new formal and informal learning programs. Yeah, hitherto we've kind of done different sort of project-based that I've mentioned, sort of exhibitions where obviously having the building affords us new opportunities to have more kind of ongoing programming. So kind of schools, workshops, for example, coffee mornings. I'm kind of slightly obsessed by the idea of having sessions for toddlers and they all leave singing feminist songs, because I think that would be hilarious, and start them young. So yeah, just kind of playing around with ideas for this sort of thing, hopefully again all kind of drawing on those participatory arts and community engagement practices that we've mentioned. I think it's a really exciting time, and it will be, I guess, like, I'm really conscious of being in post at this time of it's sort of solidifying almost literally into a building. And we sort of started as this activist moment, very kind of like ad hoc. There wasn't a master plan, there wasn't like policies in place and all that kind of jazz. And I guess I'm like leading the institutionalization of it. So I'm very conscious of that we need to do that in a way that is true to our values, and doesn't become kind of something that we don't want it to be. All the while, I was just thinking, in 100 years, there'll be a session which is like museums born in the 22nd century, and they can totally critique what I've done with this museum. So yeah, I'm sure mistakes will be made, but hopefully we can kind of continue to grow and really kind of meet our massive ambitions and lots of opportunity, but in a way that is, as I say, kind of very values-led and authentic.
Yeah, well, you can only start from where you are, can't you? So don't worry about the ones in the 22nd century. They'll have their own problems. I think it's really interesting to think about, like, to institutionalize or not to institutionalize. We are a bit schizophrenic on this sometimes. Over the years, we've been a bit schizophrenic on it. Sometimes we're like, oh, we should, you know, do this, we should institutionalize, we should get policies. And then sometimes we think, like, no, we want to stay activist, we want to stay volunteer-led, we want to stay grassrootsy, we don't want to do that. We operate in a way that we all have full-time jobs. So this is all stuff we're trying to do in the kind of evenings and weekends and the odd Thursday afternoon for a museum session. So we kind of like staying in that space where we remain open, and people can come in and work with us for a time, and then they can go out and get on with their lives, and then somebody can have an idea and come in and build that idea, and then we can, you know. So I think for us, kind of like looking forward, and we want to do more things like publications. We think we have a session on next Tuesday on the 10th with a number of different people, historians, authors, activist heritage people coming together to think about this question of imagining a museum of British colonialism. Like, who is involved, to whom should it communicate and engage, and all this kind of thing. And we're also keen to do a publication on that, inviting different people around the world to respond with their imaginings of what something like that would look like, because I think you don't even know or conceive of how many different stories people would like to be told, and in the so many different ways that people would like to see that. So that's kind of what we're doing, as we're thinking ahead of how to bring in more voices about how that kind of history can be told. But so at the moment we're in a very, like, no, we don't want to institutionalize space, but you know, things change as you grow up, don't you? Like, as an organization, you just change. You are where you are. You're 5 years old, we're 2 years old. Things just change, and you just change the way you do things. But it's exciting to see things kind of developing, and to also have these people going along this road with you. Kinsey, what do you see in the next sort of 5 years? Where would you see the museum being?
Well, at the moment, I think for us, it's like I said, we're registering as a charity, we're registering the museum, we're building a website, we've got a branding company that we have all these proposals, lots of these amazing young smiley people from across the country approaching us, and there's proposals. So we're gonna action some of that, and some of that was branding, building our website, I think building on partnerships. And so we've got the next 2 years to kind of continue fundraising. We did really well on our crowdfunding. So, you know, our target was 16,000, 17,000, we got 22. We've got recovery funding from the Arts Council. We're going to continue fundraising so we could then deliver and yeah, stay. I think at the moment, our thing is just like, can we survive this space? And so yeah, for the next 2 years, that's really finding trustees, yeah, I mean, doing a lot of work digitally. We're doing lots of really exciting small little projects. The next one we're going to be doing with Museum of London on a celebration of London, I think Festival of London Languages of London. So we're doing lots of, you know, small little projects. We did a whole program lately with the Black History Month. I think we're kind of continuing building while we transition from NUMBI to the museum. So trustees, registration, continue, and people have been wonderful, still donating to us. And we have on our website, support us on our NUMBI website. So people are still donating. So we really want to keep that going. So, you know, in a way, will kind of help us kind of, you know, deliver some of those amazing ideas. So we'll have our first exhibition in the next 2 weeks. So that would be a kind of launching, the kind of like coming out to the world and just saying, here we are in 2 years' time. So we've got themes around maps. So really that's what we've been sending out calls so people can respond to that. We've got a couple of exhibition proposals, lots of engagement. We're commissioning 15, a lot of the artists that we're working with who are up and down the country to kind of like respond. We've been doing a magazine called Scarf Magazine, and each year we'll have a theme. So we're dedicating a whole publication to the museum so we can get feedback and engage with the people who have supported us, people who have been on this journey with us, and new people that want to come on board. So our website, we hope, will help us while we're doing work on the ground in this new community hub in Bethnal Green, where we are based, which it's just beautifully refurbished. It's got lots of workshop spaces, and we've got an office in there. We've got, you know, so we're hoping that we can, one of the interesting ideas, we usually have a NUMBI festival each year. So maybe we're going to do a lot more work outdoors, and I don't know, we're kind of like on a marquee on our van, you know, driving off with our museum. So that is one of my crazy ideas. That
sounds good.
Yeah, okay. So we can actually go to turn up in that nursery, in that school, in that day centre. You know, we had an amazing festival in Victoria Park last year, which was just lovely.
Just a note on time, because they're going to cut us off.
Yeah. But anyway, so that
minutes, so we're just going to wind up. Yeah.
We might see our van come to your area.
Well, it's an interesting idea, the idea of a mobile museum. If you look in Ghana, there's some really interesting work going on with mobile museums, and the woman who runs the mobile museum there is going to join this session next week to think about what that kind of museum would look like, going to communities and doing all that kind of work. And yeah, check her out. She's an amazing person. So actually to like riff off what Kinsey said about supporting the museum, all of our museums can be supported by donations, so please feel free.
And need to be.
Can and need to be.
Because one of the challenges is we don't come with fat endowments or well-established donor pipelines. So yeah, any support is always welcome, or not necessarily financial as well.
Yeah, anything you want to contribute in kind or in cash is always welcome. And just check us all out online. We're at museumofbritishcolonialism.com. East End Women's Museum is what's the full address?
.org.
Yeah, eastendwomensmuseum.org. And then the link for the fundraising is NUMBI Arts.
Yeah, so it's NUMBI Arts. Well, it's numbi.org, and yeah, so we've got a link that says support us. So that while the museum website is coming.
Yeah, check us out and look for our events, because we've got some exciting things coming up to keep people occupied during lockdown and other things. But thank you everyone for coming. I'm so happy to see you all. So yeah, and we hope we answered any of your questions. And if you have more questions, just send us an email.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Olivia. Thank you so much to everyone for taking part in this session, and thank you to everyone who joined in the session. It was a brilliant discussion. It's so amazing to hear about the work you're doing, and also there's been such a kind of a big theme through this conference of really questioning what a museum is, and to hear from the front line of people who are reinventing that is really inspiring. And yeah, I hope you get all the support in the world for that, and can't wait to hear what you get up to next. where am I? I'm sorry about that. It's been a long week. Let me just see. So next up is a session that we've all been waiting for. It's the Secretary of the Smithsonian Institute, Lonnie Bunch, in conversation with the Labour MP, David Lammy. So that one is not to be missed. It starts at 4 p.m. So there's just enough time to go and grab yourself a drink, and we'll see you there. And don't forget that the MA Virtual Hub is open until 5. So please pop along there anytime if you'd like to meet other delegates and MA staff for an informal face-to-face chat. Thank you again to everyone, and goodbye for now. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Bye.